You've been doing things, haven't you? Not out there, not where anyone can see, but in the dark, in the quiet, in the hours nobody bothered to check on. Little rituals, little disciplines, little decisions that don't announce themselves and don't ask for applause. And somewhere in the back of your skull, there's a voice, not loud, just persistent, that wants to know, does any of this actually matter if no one ever sees it? That question. That one. Specific, quietly paralyzing question. I find it fascinating, not because it's intelligent, it isn't, but because of what it reveals about who installed it in you and when. Here's what nobody tells you about the dark. The dark isn't a problem. The dark is a workshop. Every single thing in this world that required real transformation, bone, steel, character, identity, was built somewhere nobody was watching. Pressure doesn't need an audience. Metamorphosis doesn't need a photographer. The thing that comes out of the chrysalis has no memory of being applauded while it was dissolving. But you've been taught otherwise. You've been taught that a thing doesn't count unless it's witnessed. That effort unreported is effort wasted. That growth, to be real, must be performed. And here you are, waiting for someone to notice what you did alone. I'm not going to tell you that's sad. Sad is the wrong word. Sad implies surprise. I'm not surprised. I've watched this city, watched people perform their becoming for decades. Desperate to be seen changing, unable to actually change because the performance was eating all the energy the transformation needed. What I want to know is this: when did silence start feeling like punishment to you? Don't answer. Not yet. I already know the answer. I just want you to sit with the question for a moment. It has teeth. Good teeth. Let me take you back. Not far, just far enough. You were young, younger, and you were working at something, practicing something, building something, building something, getting better at something in the way that only happens when you're alone with it, long enough for the awkward parts to smooth out. And then someone walked in, or someone found out, or you told someone, and one of two things happened. They praised you so immediately, so reflexively, that something inside you shifted, and from that moment on, you started to need the praise to feel like the work was real. Or they looked at you with that particular blankness, not cruelty, just indifference. And something inside you decided that if the work couldn't earn recognition, the work wasn't worth doing. Both of those are cages, just with different decor. Because what happened, slowly, over time, and this is the part I find genuinely interesting, is that you rearrange the order of things. You stopped working in order to become. You started working in order to be seen becoming. You stopped living in the dark and started performing instruction for a theoretical audience that may not even exist. And the whole machinery of your effort quietly bent itself toward visibility instead of depth. And so now, you sit in the silence and you feel this specific flavor of anxiety. Not boredom, not loneliness exactly. Something more like suspicion. Like the silence is trying to tell you that nothing you do here counts. Like discipline practiced without witnesses is somehow less real than discipline practiced on a stage. Like the tree that falls in the forest and makes no sound on anyone's timeline simply did not fall. You know the internal monologue. You know the internal monologue. I know you know it. It sounds like this. What's the point if nobody sees it? I've been doing this for weeks and nothing has changed. If I were really making progress, someone would notice. Maybe I'm wasting my time. Maybe the people who get results are the ones who have people watching them, pushing them, holding them accountable. Maybe I need to tell someone, post something, announce something, just to make it feel real. And the moment you do, the moment you announce it, you get a small hit of dopamine, a few comments, a handful of nods. And the project loses about 40% of its energy, because some part of your brain now believes the declaration was the action. The performance was the transformation. I know a man, very serious man, extraordinarily disciplined, who spent years doing everything in the service of a city that never once asked him to. He had this remarkable gift for showing up in the dark, doing the most difficult thing, and then disappearing before anyone could thank him or even confirm he'd been there. People called that selfless. I always thought it was something slightly more complicated than that. A man that committed to being unseen has made being unseen into its own performance. The invisibility becomes the identity, which is still an audience. Just an audience of one, watching yourself refuse to be watched. I found that philosophically generous, if nothing else. But that's not your problem exactly. Your problem is a mirror image. You don't disappear before the thanks. You stay, waiting for it. You build in the dark, then carry your work out into the light and hold it up and wait. And when the light doesn't respond, when the world yawns and scrolls past, the silence that follows isn't just empty. It's indicting. It whispers that the work must not have been worth much if it didn't catch anyone's eye. And here is what all of that costs you. It costs you the only environment in which real transformation happens. Sustained, unobserved effort over time. Not a burst. Not a sprint. The kind of long, slow, cellular change that doesn't photograph well and doesn't announce itself and doesn't have a launch date. The kind that one morning, months in, you simply notice in the mirror. And there's no one to celebrate with because no one watched it happen. Just you and the evidence. So here is the real question. Not why don't people notice. You know why. They're busy with their own performance. The real question is, why have you decided that their noticing is what makes it real? Destroy the label, they call it discipline. Quiet discipline, private practice, hidden work. They say it like it's a secondary category, like the real thing happens somewhere else, under lights, with structure and accountability and people watching the clock. Here's the problem with that word, discipline, when applied to what you do in the dark. Discipline implies force. It implies willpower fighting resistance. It implies that left to itself, the natural state of the human being is sloth. And not only the application of external structure, visible progress charts, public accountability, partners, and motivational content keeps the machine running. That is not what is happening when you work in silence. What is happening when you work in silence is something far older and far stranger than discipline. It is called formation. The difference is not semantic. Discipline is what you apply to something that resists. Formation is what happens when a thing is becoming what it actually is. You don't discipline water into being wet. You don't discipline a seed into germinating. The process is intrinsic. The conditions just have to be right. And the single most corrosive condition for genuine formation is premature exposure. They told you it was discipline. It wasn't. It was the controlled environment of your own becoming. And environments don't need applause. Reveal the real organ. So where did this need for the witness come from? Let me be precise. It did not come from weakness. It came from a system, school, family, social structure. Take your pick, specifically engineered to make internal validation impossible. Think about how you were taught to measure progress gold stars, letter grades, test scores, social approval, parent reactions, friend counts, follower counts. Every single metric for doing well was external. Not one of them was internal. Not one of them said, the only person qualified to measure whether this is working is the person doing it. So of course, you grew up believing that unwitnessed work is unvalidated work. Of course, the silence feels like suspicion. You were never given the tools to be your own witness. You were given report cards. You were given likes. You were given performance reviews. You were handed a measuring system whose entire architecture required an external evaluator. And now you're wondering why you feel anxious doing anything that doesn't have an external evaluator attached to it. This isn't a character flaw. This is a calibration error installed in you before you were old enough to notice the installation. The dark where you build things, that silence, is not emptiness. It is the first environment in your entire life where the only evaluator available is you. And it turns out you don't know how to trust yourself yet. Because you were never asked to. You were only asked to perform for others. Turn the lens on the people who judged it now. The ones who question it. The ones who say, why are you so secretive? Why don't you share your process? Why are you so private about your goals? Accountability is important, you know. You should tell people what you're working on. It's motivating. It creates community. Let's examine that impulse carefully, shall we? When a person is made deeply uncomfortable by your private practice, when you're refused to perform your growth publicly, disturbs them. What is the most honest explanation? It isn't concern for you. Concern for you would look like, are you okay? Is the work serving you? Is the silence healthy or is it isolation? Concern is personal, specific, what they're actually expressing. And I want you to hear this precisely, is a threat response. Your private growth is evidence that the external validation system is optional. Your discipline in the dark is proof that the performance infrastructure they've built their own identity around is not, in fact, mandatory around. You are, by simply existing in your own quiet process, implicitly challenging the architecture of their self-worth. And people who have built houses of approval don't like to be reminded the material is optional. I once had the pleasure of observing a man who had committed magnificently, I'll give him that, to a very specific set of rules about how things ought to be done. Very principled man. Rules for everything. Rules about who gets protected and who doesn't. Rules about what methods are acceptable and which aren't. And people around him kept asking, why do you hold yourself to standards no one asked for? And he called it integrity. I call it a man who'd confused the cage he built with the identity inside it. The difference, as I said, never occurred to him. Interesting. The people who police your process are always running from something in their own. Name the concreted advantages. Let me tell you exactly what working in silence produces that public performance cannot. Iteration without penalty. When nobody is watching, you are free to be wrong. You are free to try the version that embarrasses you, the approach that seems absurd, the angle you can't quite articulate yet. Public process locks you into narrative consistency. You said you were doing this, so you have to keep doing this. Or the audience notices the pivot and asks uncomfortable questions. Private process allows you to pivot 30 times before breakfast, to burn the draft, to restart with better information, to evolve without it being a story, depth without performance tax, Every unit of energy spent on documenting your process, presenting your growth, explaining your journey to an audience. That's a unit of energy not spent on the actual process, growth, and journey. The performance tax is real. It compounds. Across a year, across a decade, the person who worked privately and the person who performed their working have invested fundamentally different quantities of actual effort into the actual thing. And here's what 3, 5, 10 years of unobserved formation produces. A result so disproportionate to what the world expected of you that it looks, from the outside, like luck, like sudden talent, like overnight success. They will say, "Where did that come from?" You won't bother explaining, because the explanation is the dark, and the dark doesn't translate well. Silence is not a limitation. Silence is a compound interest account that the impatient refuse to open. The difference between misuse and mastery, here is where I want to be careful, because there is a version of this that is not what I'm describing, and I want you to be able to tell the difference. There is a silence born of fear. A private practice that is private because you're terrified of being seen, not because you're protecting the process, but because judgment feels like death to you, and so you hide not to focus, but to avoid. That is not the silence I'm describing. That silence is a symptom. It looks the same from the outside, but it feels very different from the inside. You know the difference between the quiet of a wolf moving through a forest and the quiet of something small hiding under a rock? The fall silence I'm describing is intentional, chosen, not anxious, but patient, not hiding, but focused. It is the silence of a person who has decided that the work is real, independent of whether anyone sees it, and who therefore sees no particular reason to trade depth for visibility. One of those silences is a cage. The other is a workshop. The distinction is not how it looks. The distinction is what you're building while you're in it. The language replicant, stop using the word discipline. Stop using the word accountability. Stop using the phrase, "I need to stay motivated." These words were built by a system that assumes you are fundamentally lazy and require external management to function. They are not descriptive. They are condescending. They are the vocabulary of someone who has not yet trusted themselves to know what they want and pursue it. Replace them. When you sit down to work in the dark, the word is not discipline. The word is construction. The word is construction. I am building. When you return to the private practice after days away, the word is not accountability. The word is recalibration. I am recalibrating. The word is recalibrating. When the silence feels heavy and you want to announce something to make it feel real, the word you need is not motivation. The word is evidence. The word is evidence. Not yet evidence for anyone else. Evidence for me. The internal language shapes the internal experience. A man who tells himself he is being disciplined will always feel like he is fighting himself. A man who tells himself he is building something will feel like an architect. Same behavior. Radically different relationship to the work. You are not forcing yourself. You are constructing the environment, and you have rooms in your life, literal and metaphorical, that were designed to make private work feel wrong. Identify them. The group chat where someone always asks, "So, what are you working on?" The relationship way. Your silence about your goals is interpreted as secretiveness or emotional distance. A social media feed that presents everyone else's public progress and turns your private progress invisible by contrast. The mentor or family member who keeps suggesting you share more, post more, announce more. Because in their model of the world, unshared effort is unserious effort. These environments are not neutral. They're actively hostile to the kind of formation we're discussing. Not hostile with intent. They're not trying to undermine you. They're hostile by design, because they were built around a different model of how growth works. They were built around the performance model, and you are trying to operate according to the formation model. You do not need to burn these relationships. You need to be deliberate about which conversations you have in which rooms. You don't discuss the private work in the spaces designed to extract the performance. You protect the quiet the same way you'd protect a fire you've just started. Not because you're hiding it, but because wind exists. And you understand what it does to flames that aren't yet stable. Audit the rooms. Keep what feeds the work. Starve what performs it. The Respam's protocol. The next time someone questions your private practice, challenges the silence, pushes for announcement, implies that unshared effort is somehow suspect, you will have 2 sentences ready. Not defensive, not aggressive. Certain. First, I share results. I protect process. Second, the work is real to me. That's enough. No elaboration. No explanation of your philosophy. No explanation to debate the merits of public versus private accountability. Just those 2 sentences. Said the way a person says something they have simply decided, not argued, not convinced themselves of, but decided. The kind of certainty that doesn't harden under pry. Sure, because it isn't performing certainty. It just is. Practice the tone, not just the words. The tone is mildly interested that you asked. Completely unmoved. The ownership statement. This is not a mantra. This is not something you say aloud or post somewhere or share with anyone. This is simply a decision made once privately in the dark, that from this point forward operates as a fixed fact about you rather than a negotiated position. The work I do when no one is watching is the most real work I do. Not because it's secret, not because I'm hiding, but because it is the only work completely free of performance tax, audience management, and the corrosive need for external confirmation. The version of me built in silence is more accurate, more durable, and more mine than any version assembled in public for someone else's benefit. I am not waiting for permission to count this. I am not waiting for recognition to make it real. I am building quietly with intent. And the result will be the only announcement I ever needed to make. Hold that. Not as inspiration, as architecture. The thing you build on. Let me tell you what this is actually about. Underneath all of it, there is a larger structure at work here. Not in your head, but in the world. A system that has a profound, vested interest in making your inner life legible. Visible, quantifiable, shareable. Because a person whose sense of progress is entirely internal is a person who cannot be managed, monetized, or measured by someone else. And the whole architecture of modern attention. Every platform, every metric, every notification is built on the assumption that you will trade your private formation for public performance. That you will convert your becoming into content. That you will interrupt your growth to document it. And in doing so, generate the only kind of value the system knows how to extract the kind you can count. You are not built for that. I don't mean that sentimentally. I mean it structurally. Whatever you are, whatever specific configuration of obsession and capacity and vision you contain, it requires a particular ecosystem to develop fully. And that ecosystem has a non-negotiable feature. Long stretches of time where nobody interrupts the process, where the work gets to breathe and iterate and collapse and rebuild without an audience expecting the previous version to have been the final one. The monsters, the real ones the ones the world eventually has to reckon with, were not built on stages. They were built in silence, in bedrooms and basements and long, unremarkable hours that nobody photographed because nothing photographable appeared to be happening. And then one day, no announcement, no launch, no prepared remarks. They simply were fully formed, already complete. You have been treating the silence like a waiting room, like a place you sit until the real work begins, until someone opens the door and tells you it's your turn to be seen. The silence is not the waiting room. The silence is the work. And the only thing you've been waiting for, the only permission that was ever required, the only permission that was ever required was the decision to stop treating your own dark as a place you visit reluctantly and start treating it as the room where everything that actually matters about you gets built. Other people will see the result eventually. They always do. And they'll call it talent or luck or overnight success. The full inventory of comfortable explanations that protect them from having to ask where you actually were while they were busy being watched. You were here, quiet, building. The monsters made in silence are the ones nobody sees coming.